Hello, and welcome back to the Gluten Free RN podcast. I'm Nadine the Gluten Free RN, and today on episode 68, it has been requested that I talk about why we recommend no dairy on a gluten-free diet. Stay tuned. Hello, and welcome back to the Gluten Free RN podcast. I'm still Nadine the Gluten Free RN. And one of our fabulous listeners has requested that I talk about why no dairy on a gluten-free diet. Why would I recommend no dairy along with no gluten for people with celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity? So today we're going to talk about that. It's a very interesting topic, and I probably should have talked more in depth about it before now, but we're getting around to it. And I did have a lot of fun talking about Russia and Poland and the indigenous populations around the world. So today we'll step back and we'll really investigate why no dairy on a gluten-free diet. So a bit of a backstory. When I originally got diagnosed with celiac disease and went gluten-free, I didn't know to go dairy-free also. So for a year and a half, I was gluten-free and I thought that was enough. And I replaced all of my gluten-containing products with gluten-free products, and I was still learning. And on that very steep learning curve that we all go through, or that we are all on. But this was 11 years ago, so I didn't have as many resources. And interestingly enough, I found that I could very easily keep up with the research articles that were coming out at the time on celiac disease. And I can confidently tell you I can no longer keep up with those research articles that are coming out at this point. They're coming out fast and furious, and there's a lot of new information. So if there's something that you find that perhaps I need to know about, shoot me an email with a link to that article or that research article, and I'll happily take a look at it. And if you have any requests for future episodes of the Gluten Free RN podcast, please shoot me an email or a text or get a hold of me and let me know what you'd like to hear about or what is missing on topics for the Gluten Free RN podcast. So I did go gluten-free for a year and a half, and then I found out that, my sinuses were still not improved despite that sinus surgery I had in October 2006. And so the more I researched, the more I realized, maybe I need to take out dairy too. Now, during that year and a half that I had taken out gluten, I noticed that my dairy consumption had gone through the roof. And by that I meant I really did believe all of the advertising that everything tasted better with cheese or everything was better with cheese on it. So I totally went overboard on cheese and dairy because I thought, well, I'm taking gluten out. I certainly have to, eat more cheese and eat more of the things that I obviously love. Well, come to find out, those dairy proteins, the casein protein and the gluten protein, are molecularly very similar. So, number one, our bodies read them the same. And also, because those proteins are also capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier, and we've talked before about the gluten protein or the gliadin protein crossing the blood-brain barrier, because we don't just have leaky guts, we have leaky blood-brain barriers, leaky lungs, leaky skin. And because those proteins can cross the blood-brain barrier, they cause a couple of things. They cause brain inflammation. And because of that brain inflammation, they also cause hypoxia, which is decreased oxygen flow to the brain. So your brain needs a few things. It needs some sugar, and it also needs lots of oxygen. Your brain uses 50% of your oxygen reserve from every breath. So it's really important that your body has access to oxygen. And here we have a situation because of the inflammation caused by these proteins, your brain doesn't have access to all of the oxygen it needs. There are a number of things that can cause, including brain fog, anxiety, depression, irritability, fatigue. So it's really important that we remove both of those proteins. That's one reason. Because of the damage that occurs in the small intestine with celiac disease, the initial damage that is caused is called Marsh 1 damage, And it's when the microvilli that are on the villi actually get destroyed or damaged. Those microvilli on the long finger-like projections are the microvilli that excrete the enzymes that break down sugar, so sucrase and lactase. Those are the two enzymes that come from those microvilli. So when those microvilli get damaged, those enzymes go away. So a lot of people will say they're lactose intolerant. And that was sometimes their first or only symptom of celiac disease. The fact that they are lactose intolerant is potentially a good reason to be tested for celiac disease proper and non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So if those microvilli are destroyed, they are the first to be destroyed or damaged and the last to grow back, especially if a person has Marsh 4 damage, which is the destruction of all of the villi in the intestines or in patches. But if the villi are gone, certainly there's no microvilli. So those microvilli would be the last to grow back and then resume potentially excreting those enzymes that break down sugar and lactase, the sugar in milk. But if you have increased permeability of your intestinal wall due to damage, and if the gluten protein and the casein protein, which are molecularly very similar, are capable of getting into our bloodstream and crossing the blood-brain barrier, what we know about those proteins is that they will bind with the opioid receptors in our brain. So there's caseomorphines and glutenomorphines. Some people refer to them as gliadomorphins. Those are exorphins. So endorphins are hormones that we actually produce. And if you are familiar or you're a runner with a runner's high, those are endorphins that make us feel very euphoric or happy. Exorphins are things that we consume that have an impact on our brain and make us feel a different way. So things like alcohol, certain medications, other drugs are considered to be exorphins. So here we have two potential food proteins that are capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier and will connect with those opioid receptors. Now, opioids are a big thing in the news right now because we have what's called an opioid epidemic. People are dying at a very frightening rate from opioid overdoses. Very early on, I began to think of food as a gateway drug for opioid addictions. That may or may not be proven to be correct, but at this point, I really do think it needs to be evaluated on a deeper level through research and maybe some really pointed studies to find out if some of our things that we consider to be food are actually gateway drugs for things like opioid addictions. That may sound way out there, and that's okay. As a scientist and as a nurse, I want to know the answers to these questions. These are the burning questions, because if food is a gateway drug, and especially people that have celiac disease proper, we know that many times people crave the foods that are making us sick in much the same way that people would crave opioids despite those opioids actually causing them bodily damage and potentially death. So we know that gluten and casein, which is the dairy protein, are exorphins, and they do bind with the opioid receptors. And if you pay attention, if you have anybody in your circle or you work with autistic kids or kids on the autism spectrum, you will find that many of them are on a gluten-free, casein-free diet. And there's a reason for that. There's very little research and not enough to actually prove that a gluten-free, casein-free diet will help them. However, there's a couple compelling components. So if we have a celiac patient or a child that has to go on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet, I'll talk to the parents and I'll say, look, they have to be on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. And I understand that all they eat is pizza with cheese, macaroni with butter, grilled cheese sandwiches, mac and cheese, wheat and dairy, wheat and dairy, wheat and dairy. But you really do need to put them on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet or casein-free diet. And the parents will sometimes say, well, there's no way I can do both at the same time. They will have nothing to eat. And I say, okay, fine. Put them on a gluten-free diet and then come back and tell me what actually happens. So what happens is they'll come back in and they'll say, oh my gosh, we took them off gluten, But over a period of time, their dairy consumption, they were drinking like 7 gallons of milk a week and they could not get enough ice cream. The other interesting component of this is if the gluten and the casein have an opioid-like effect on our brain, these kids are narcotizing themselves with their food. They're medicating with food. So if you take one of the drugs away, if you take the gluten away, the dairy consumption will just go really sky high. And it's pretty much predictable that this will happen. I know it happened for myself before I realized that the dairy was not actually doing me any favors. Plus, dairy causes your body to produce increased mucus, and people with difficulty breathing or sinus issues or that chronic cough that some people have, that phlegmy cough, if you take away the dairy, that will all go away. And there are lots of dairy replacements at this point. And I can tell you, for me to not eat cheese, that was a big thing. Not only was I addicted to gluten, I was addicted to cheese. I couldn't get enough. I thought dairy, it's so good. Anyway, when I went dairy-free, I replaced my milk when I was having cereal still or granola with things like coconut milk or hemp milk or almond milk. And I also used hazelnut milk. I'm not a big fan of rice or soy milk. Those seem to be very nutrient deficient, and I like super good high-fat milks that are nutrient dense. And if they're nutrient dense, then I say go for it. My 2 favorite are coconut milk and hemp milk. The coconut milk I like is called Aroy D, AROY''D, and it's from Thailand, and it's in my co-op, and I really like it because all that's in it is coconut milk, 100%. There's no preservatives added. It's organic. And in Thai, it means delicious. So it's made in Thailand and it's phenomenal. I make desserts with it. I make coconut curry chicken or lamb. There's tons of things I use with the coconut milk. Hemp milk we use for many different things also, like chia seed pudding. And to mix everything up, of course, almond and hazelnut milk. But really, I do avoid rice and soy milk. I really don't find that they have any nutritional value that is worthy, especially when I have so many other options. The other nice thing is that for 8 years, I didn't eat any cheese. I just thought the ones that were available were somewhat not palatable. But that all changed when Kite Hill came out with an almond milk cheese that I found divine. They made a brie cheese at the time, which they no longer make, and I really wish they did because it was my favorite. I loved having something that resembled and tasted like brie cheese, but they also make a cream cheese, a ricotta cheese, and some flavored spreads. Very, very good replacement cheeses, so I was very happy about that. And now we have a company in Oregon called New Culture. It's NUCULTURE, New Culture. And they have 3 flavors that are extremely good. An herb flavor, a bacon chipotle, and the pimento. Very good cheeses, nice spreads. And if I'm traveling, I will get those non-dairy cheese spreads and use them with Mary's crackers or Jill's crackers. And I will use them as a snack or somehow incorporate them into a meal. So once again, all of you that are coming into a gluten-free, dairy-free diet at this point, you have lots of options. And I would like to tell a quick story. And this is from several years ago. It's from a lovely family that I've known for quite a while. And they came in and they had been searching for answers for years. They had a son who was born autistic. And now he was in his late 20s at this point. They came to one of my classes and they said, oh my gosh, this could in fact be the missing link. This could be what we've been looking for and searching for over 20 years. And I was cautiously optimistic, as I try to be, but I really did say for a long time in previous to meeting them that we really did have to catch children that had autism before the age of 6 when their neural pathways were rooted. After that, I didn't think that we could reverse the damage or do any benefit by putting kids on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. I don't say that anymore. This mom actually put her son on a gluten-free diet, and I'm not even sure if he went gluten-free, dairy-free. And I was really was cautious. I'm like, I have no idea what's going to happen, but everybody's an experiment. So come back and tell me what happens. So within 6 weeks, she came into my office and she was pretty much skipping and smiling. And I'm like, what happened? Did you win the lottery? What's going on? And she said, no, he's better. He is making eye contact. He's trying to be verbal. He laughs a little bit. He's more interactive with the family. And he's much more likely to leave the house because he doesn't have explosive diarrhea anymore. So we know that there's a gut-brain connection. We know that a lot of kids with autism or learning disabilities also have GI issues such as diarrhea or constipation or upset stomachs or belly pain. So the gut-brain connection is really strong. And as we learn more about the microbiome, we'll have to add that into the mix also. But the fact that this man in his late 20s could get better on a gluten-free diet and his brain started to work a little bit better and he became more interactive and more social, that's a win. We'll take that. And if you can imagine that he wouldn't have had this opportunity and his family never would have known that potentially just by changing his diet, he could have gotten better. It's always worth a shot. It's a clinical trial. It's an experiment. And everybody needs to be empowered to make decisions about their health and what they eat and the benefits of a paleo-type diet, which focuses on meats, fish, and eggs, nuts and seeds, fruits and vegetables, hopefully all organic, hopefully grass-fed, no antibiotic, no hormone meats, and wild-caught fish. I pay much closer attention to what I eat now and where it comes from than I ever did. It's kind of funny. I'm like, well, I really didn't care before where my food came from. And I thought if it was available to eat as food, then it must be safe for me. I no longer believe that. I now know the power of food and that food can be a very strong medicine and can help us get better, or it can make us very, very sick to the point of causing damage to our bodies that will kill us. So we want to have very healthy brains. We want to be able to think and make good decisions based on information that's available to us. So one of the ways I encourage people to get their brains back is to look at their diet and decide if they're going to be gluten-free, dairy-free, or get tested for celiac disease. I always recommend that people get tested at least for a baseline before they change their diet. There's no danger to going on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet or a paleo-type diet, especially if that paleo-type diet is a super good high-fat diet, which helps repair our neurological system. And we used to be told that our neurological system was finite. Like once we damaged cells or once those cells died, they would never grow back. We know that's not true anymore. We know we have neuroplasticity. We know that our brains can get better. We also know that our nervous systems can get better. If you're at all interested in MS, then you need to watch Dr. Terry Walls on the TED Talks or read one of her books, The Walls Protocol, or check her out on the internet. She is fascinating because one of the things she did when she found herself debilitated in a wheelchair from MS, from progressive MS, she changed her diet after she did a lot of research and found out that potentially she could heal her body with food. And she's no longer debilitated in a wheelchair. As a matter of fact, the last time I saw her in San Francisco, not that long ago, she was walking without a cane. Anything is possible. At some point, there is damage done that we can't reverse, and I understand that, and I hope you understand that also. But we should always give our bodies the best opportunity to heal. And if one of those ways to do it is to take dairy out of our diet along with gluten, then that needs to be considered and recommended. My body got remarkably better on a gluten-free diet, but it wasn't until I took the dairy out also that I realized dairy was very much a problem for my body also. I've also talked to some people who will get a DH outbreak or a dermatitis herpetiformis outbreak after they are exposed to dairy. They're very careful with the gluten, but sometimes the dairy will get in some of the food that they're consuming, and they notice they also have a DH outbreak, just like they would with a gluten exposure with a dairy exposure. Again, our bodies read those proteins, which are molecularly similar And I do tell people it's not just the dairy, it is any mammary milk. It's any milk from sheep or goats. So you really do have to be careful about avoiding any mammary milk because it will also have those casein proteins in it. And really what we're trying to avoid are those casein proteins, which are molecularly very similar to the gluten protein or the gliadin protein. So I hope that answers the very burning question of why no dairy on a gluten-free diet. I hope that helps explain from several viewpoints of why dairy is perhaps not your friend and why it is potentially causing your body further harm or preventing you from getting better completely. So it's another one of those proteins that are potentially read as a toxin to your body, and toxin meaning poison. So always good to avoid those things that would be read as poison by our bodies, of course. So thank you very much for joining me for episode 68 of Why No Dairy on a Gluten-Free Diet. I hope this explanation has been helpful. Thank you to everyone who has joined the Gluten Free RN from around the world. I am paying attention to where people are listening from around the world, and we have new listeners in different parts of the world, which I'll announce next episode for episode 69 of the Gluten Free RN podcast. So thank you all for joining me, Nadine Gruskowiak, the Gluten Free RN, and I will see you back next week for episode 69 of the Gluten Free RN podcast. Stay tuned and don't forget to come back on Friday at 9 a.m. when the next episode will be released. Until next time, bye.